morning, Malta and Gozo, and welcome to another episode of Lovin Daily. I'm your host, Sam Vassallo, joined by Chris Perugine. How are you, Chris?
I am missing hairdressers and gyms,
Me
but
too.
okay otherwise.
Me too. Here are today's headlines. So, fresh out of court, WhatsApp messages reveal Jorgen FENECH'S escape plan. Next up, will we have festivals this year? Yay or nay? Well, we'll know very soon, with Minister of Tourism Clayton Bartolo set to announce whether we will have these festivals in the coming weeks. Meanwhile, also in Cabinet, Minister CARMELO ABELA misused €7,000 worth of taxpayer money to boost his image. A historic gender quota bill has officially passed through Parliament. And lastly, Malta's richest 10% are now own more than half the country's wealth. Take it away, Chris.
That's a depressing statistic. Okay.
Super depressing.
Okay, so yesterday we had a really interesting bail hearing. So Jorgen FENECH, who is charged with the assassination of Daphne Caruana Galizia, was requesting bail once again, and once again it was denied. But what was interesting is that the police yesterday revealed a number of text messages and WhatsApp messages that really revealed the plan of Jorgen FENECH to escape. Now, what we know is that Jorgen FENECH was arrested on his yacht at 5 a.m. on the 20th of November 2019. And he's always claimed, or his lawyers have always claimed, that, oh, this wasn't an escape, we're just going to do some repairs in France. But what we know, or in Sicily, but what we know now is that there were a number of SMS exchanges with his uncle, Ray FENECH, who's still heading the Tomas group, with his brother, Franco FENECH. And the plan was originally to leave by airport, and that was scrapped. Then there was this idea of getting on a private jet. Ultimately, they decided to get onto the boat, go to Pozzallo, take no crew on the boat except for the captain. Once in Pozzallo in Sicily, to get onto a truck and get to Nice, where Jorgen FENECH'S brother, Franco FENECH, would be waiting. There was this plan to use cash to transfer a lot of money to Dubai. So, the plans of Jorgen FENECH to escape were laid out very clearly in court yesterday, and obviously that led to a denial of bail because he remains a flight risk. Today there is the hearing of Nexia BT. You could follow the live blog today on lovinmalta.com. And it's interesting to know that Brian Tonner was also facing a Public Accounts Committee hearing yesterday where he failed to answer any questions. There was one interesting message which we didn't yet mention where a K was mentioned. So it wasn't, we don't know if it was a direct reference to Keith Schembri, but in this text messaging between Jorgen FENECH and his uncle, Jorgen FENECH said that Kay assured him nothing was going to happen with regard to his arrest. So again, a very revealing sitting. I know that it's quite tiring and difficult to keep up with all the things happening in court today and all the parliamentary committees and inquiries and stuff. But when you do stop to pay attention, it really is always very, very interesting, like it was yesterday. So that's what we heard about Jorgen FENECH yesterday.
Indeed, it sounds awfully, like a very complex movie plot, and hopefully, we'll see some more developments come out in court today.
Kind of need a season recap every so often, to know what's going on. But
exactly,
anyway.
Always cliffhangers. Moving on to our next story. So, Tourism Minister Clayton Bartolo will announce government's decision on whether festivals will happen in summer or not. Now, Glitch and Lost and Found, which are like two major festivals in Malta, are already selling tickets for this summer. It awfully reminds me of the infamous pool parties last August, when we had everything under control like we do now, and suddenly we went berserk and we're partying. However, this time we are armed with a vaccine, so things will definitely be different. I think even Israel and Australia have already begun opening concerts, so it could very well be a possibility. Now, Clayton Bartolo insisted that we will remain cautious and we have to look at different niches of tourism, like was outlined in Malta's new tourism plan. Like, we need to be a destination for wellness and diving and LGBT tourism, and yet the most recent measures to kind of boost tourism kind of gives me the idea that all we want is like anyone with money to just come over and spend it. You know, we're going to give tourists 200 euros each to stay in our hotels. We also have new routes, a flight route, which is cool for us, I guess, to some Italian towns like Cagliari, Tripoli, Genoa and Crete as well, which is super cool. Thankfully, we still have our COVID-19 cases in check. We have 58 new cases found yesterday, 41 new recoveries, no deaths, and cases in ITU are down. So we'll just have to wait and see how this develops.
Looking forward to summer. So yesterday as well, we had a minister, CARMELO ABELA, accused of robbing the taxpayer 7,000 euros. So there was a complaint filed by Repubblica about a series of full-page ads that CARMELO ABELA, who is currently in the news for being sort of alleged to have been involved in a bank heist, a claim he denies and is suing for libel on. But CARMELO ABELA basically ran a series of full-page ads which the Standards Commissioner has deemed to be simply a means of self-promotion ahead of a cabinet reshuffle. So there was a cabinet reshuffle being touted at the time, and there was this mad rush to get out this series of adverts, which basically just show CARMELO ABELA, his face, and you know, a big photo of him with a number of achievements that his government or his ministry achieved. There was a funny paragraph in the Standards Commissioner's report which talks about all the typographical errors in the ad and his indiscriminate use of capital letters, basically saying that even the ad itself didn't reflect very well on the minister or the government. But more than anything, what's interesting, I think, about this report is that the Standards Commissioner makes it quite clear that his recommendation would be for CARMELO ABELA to give back the 7,000 euros that he took from the taxpayer for his own shameless self-promotion. And now we need to see whether that is going to happen. So it'll be interesting to see whether the minister is going to accept the results of this report, whether the Prime Minister is going to make him pay, and whether this sets a precedent for other misuse of taxpayer money. We know that we've been following the case of how much money was misused on Facebook when the ministries were spending lots of money on Facebook, even though they didn't have Facebook pages themselves, and so they were spending this money on the individual profiles of ministers. So we'll be following this case very, very closely. It's a very interesting report. I suggest you read it. Get to lovinmalta.com, see what find the piece about CARMELO ABELA, and look at the report of the Standards Commissioner, because I think it's also nice that we raise our standards and that we kind of become more conscious about what we think is acceptable and what isn't, because I think this is the sort of ad that many of us would have just glossed over, and when you kind of get into the detail of it and the fact that, you know, a permanent secretary approved this, that 7,000 euros were spent on this, that, you know, you start to think, you know, how much of our money is being wasted on promotion and propaganda of politicians.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Indeed, let's set a precedent and make history for Malta. Now, speaking of history, the gender quotas bill has officially been passed through Parliament. So just to jog your memory a bit, I'm sure you've heard about it. It's very controversial still. Essentially, this bill will add 12 seats to our House of Representatives if women don't make up 40% of the House after a general election, which is rumored to happen very soon. So essentially, you know, questions are still there about it bloating up our Parliament. It is very bloated. It will make us, you know, over 70 MPs in total. And some of the hurdles in front of women coming into Parliament are still there. You know, MPs are it's still not a full-time job. They are still underpaid. You know, there are still a lot of family measures that could be put into place to actually encourage more women to put their names on ballot sheets. And it kind of you know, eases the burden of political parties, because they could put quotas on themselves and ensure that their ballot sheets are 50-50 represented with men and women. Now, I'm excited to see some fresh faces, especially women, but it is definitely not the end-all solution to our poor representation of women. Just 13% of our parliament are women, and I don't think that this kind of measure, just writing it off, is going to address this.
Yeah, and I think there's also the other point, I'm not sure if you mentioned it, of the smaller parties, right? And the fact that
Exactly.
this measure basically only gives this benefit to the parties like PN and PL that will be elected in the majority in Parliament. So, moving on to the last story of the day, which is, I guess, quite depressing. That's 10% of people, 10% of the wealthiest people in Malta own more than 50% of the country's wealth. And that figure is going up very rapidly, while for the rest of us, that figure is going down, right? The share of wealth that most people have in Malta is lower than the share of wealth that just the 10% have. And in fact, it gets even worse. 5% of the wealthiest people in Malta went from having a share of 33% of the country's wealth now to 40% of the country's wealth. And this happened in the years between 2010 and 2017, when ironically we had voted in a government to create the very opposite of this inequality, right? One of the whole points of the Labour government was to decrease inequality, to raise the poor out of poverty, and to make sure that the hard-working sort of man and woman in the street is able to sort of earn a decent living and not be screwed over by the rest of the system. And in fact, what we've seen is the opposite of that, right? We've seen inequality increase quite rapidly. And even though Malta traditionally isn't one of the most unequal societies, in fact, we are still 6th from the bottom in Europe when it comes to inequality. But the worrying thing is that the trend is going from, whereas in the rest of Europe, in most places, the inequality is decreasing. In Malta, the inequality is increasing very, very rapidly. So, yeah, I guess it's a good reminder of how we need more sort of scientific and data-driven policy rather than, propaganda that makes us believe we're better off, even though we might be significantly worse off. And on that note, have a day full of loving, I guess.